Hello, Harris County Precinct One kids. My name is Coach James Hudson. I'm a U.S. Chess Federation coach and I'm the proud founder of a 501c3 entitled Perfect Team Play. We do a number of things with the kids, but our prize piece is our chess club. We teach chess. So let us get right into our instructions. In order to learn chess, the first thing that I want you to remember is TAPS. T-A-P-S. TAPS. T-A-P-S. TAPS stands for time, attention, patience, and strategy. T-A-P-S. Time, attention, patience, and strategy. The T stands for time. The A stands for attention. The P stands for patience. The S stands for strategy. Now those are 4 skills that it takes to be a good chess player. But more importantly, those are 4 life skills that it takes to be active, productive, successful citizens in society. Okay? Now as we move forward, what we're going to do is we're going to go step by step, but I want you to remember TAPS. If I say TAPS, you say time, attention, patience, and strategy. Okay? Now the first thing we're going to learn today is we're going to learn how to set the board up. Okay? We're going over basic fundamentals from A to Z. So in setting the board up, I want you to remember the first thing that you should always remember is that your light color pieces will always line up on the H1 side of the board. Now my camera should be able to see that, or the camera should be able to see the H1. When you see H1 on the U.S. Chess Federation board, which is what this is, which it has the letters and the numbers, you see H1, you know that your light color pieces will line up on that side of the board. On what side of the board? The H1 side of the board. Okay, that's rule number 1. Don't forget it. Rule number 2, when you're setting up the board, is that your queen will always line up on your D letter. This is your queen. She will line up on the light color square, D letter if she's light. She will line up on the dark color square, D letter if she's dark. Okay? We'll go over it one more time. D letter, dark square, dark queen. D letter, light square, light queen. Okay? Those are your first 2 rules. Let's review. The first thing you want to remember when you're setting up the board on a letter and number board is that the light color pieces will always line up on the H1 side of the board. The second rule is that your queen, whether she's dark or light, she will line up on the D letter. Say queen lines up on the D letter. Don't forget that. Now let's go over the name of the pieces, and we'll go over it in a simple form. Rook, knight, bishop on one side. Rook, knight, bishop on the other side. So your rooks and your knights and your bishops line up right next to one another on both sides of the board. Then you have your queen and your king. Okay? Rooks, knights, bishops, queen, king, bishop, knight, rook, pawns. Your pawns will always line up directly in front of your major and minor pieces. Your major pieces are your queen and your rook. Your minor pieces are your knights and bishops. And your pawns are not pieces, they are called soldiers. What are pawns called? They are called soldiers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dismantle the pieces, and then I'm going to set them back up again so you can see them. Okay? So what letter does your queen go on? D letter. Then your king goes right next to your queen. Then you have your rooks. What do you have next? Your knights. What do you have next? Your bishops. Then what do you have in front of those pieces? You have your pawns in front. So let's look at the math. You have 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, a king and a queen, and 8 pawns. 2 knights, 2 rooks, 2 bishops, a king and a queen, and 8 pawns. Okay? Are you with me? All right. Now we know how to set the board up. So the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to learn the value of the pieces, which is an intro to what we call chess math, and we'll get into that as we move forward. But let's learn the value of the pieces. The rook is worth 5, bishops and knights are worth 3, king is priceless. The king is priceless. Then you have the queen, then you have the bishop, the knight, and the rook. So rooks are 5, bishops and knights are 3, queen is 9, pawns are 1. King is priceless. Let's go over it again. Rooks are 5, knights and bishops are 3, king is priceless, queen is 9, pawns are 1. Okay? Now, before we go any further, we're going to review. Let's review. Okay, so if we have the light color pieces, what side of the board do we line the pieces on? H1. What letter does our queen go on? D letter if she's darker, if she's light. How do we line the pieces up? Rooks go on the end, knights go next to rooks, bishop, king, queen, then 8 pawns. 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, a king and a queen, and 8 pawns. Okay, let's go over the value of the pieces one more time. The rook is worth 5, the knight is worth 3, the bishop is worth 3, the king is priceless. It's the most valuable piece on the board. When we say priceless, that means that it can't be bought. Okay, and the queen is worth 9, bishops and knights are worth 3, rooks are worth 5, pawns are worth 1. I'll continue to go over this as much as I can to help you with your memorization, okay? You need to know the value of the pieces, so when you start playing the game, you won't trade a 3 for a 1 or a 9 for a 3. Your trades should be even or for more, or if they're any time they're for less, then you're trading for less because you're sacrificing and you know exactly where you're going. So let us go back over how to set the board up, okay? And you should be able to see very clearly now on this demo board on how we set the pieces up. But I do want you to remember the 2 basic fundamental rules. Remember the first rule is that if I have the light color pieces, which yellow is lighter than brown, so they're the light color pieces, they represent the light color pieces now, you always line those pieces up on the H1 side of the board. H1. Everybody see H1? So you know when you sit down at the board and you see H1, you automatically know that you have the light color pieces. Okay? Now the second rule is that your queen, this is your queen, she will always line up on the D letter. This is your D letter, this is your light color queen, light square. D letter, dark color queen, dark square. Those are your first 2 rules in setting up the board. Now, as we go a little bit further, we'll see that we have, and I'll go over the name of the pieces. You have the rook, the knight, the bishop, the king, the queen, bishop, knight, rook. So your rook, knights, and bishops line up right next to one another on both sides of the board. Okay? Rooks go on the end, knights go next to rooks, then you have your bishops. Then you have your king, which has a cross at the top, then you have your queen. Okay? Let's go again. Rooks are on the end, then your knights, then your bishops, then your queen, and your king. Okay? And in front of those pieces, on the very next row, you have your pawns. Okay? You have 8 pawns, 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, a queen, and a king. Okay? Let's go over it again. You have 8 pawns, 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, a queen, and a king. Okay? That should be very simple for you. Remember what you're being taught now. Okay, so let's move a little bit further and go with the value of the pieces. Okay? So we know that the rook is worth 5, bishops and knights are worth 3, queen is worth 9, pawns are worth 1, king is priceless. So rooks 5, knights 3, bishops 3, queen 1, queen 9, pawn 1, king priceless. The king is priceless because it's the most valuable piece on the board. If it's not protected, then it can get trapped, and that's how you lose the game. That's what we call check or checkmate. We'll get into that as we learn more. I'm just giving you a heads up on that. Remember, the king must always be protected. Okay? Do we need to review? Yes. Right quick, we'll review. Light color pieces line up on the H1 side. Queen lines up on the D letter if she's dark or light. Okay? And the way you line the pieces up are, and I'll go by the name, 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, a queen and a king. 8 pawns. And I know you're saying, why am I continuing to go over this? Well, I continue to go over because we learn by repetition. The more you hear me say it, the more you're going to remember it, and the more you're going to be able to obtain the information and be able to set the board up properly. Okay? Now, let's go over it again. Rooks 5, knights 3, bishops 3, queen 9, pawns 1, king priceless. Now that we know the fundamentals of how to set the pieces up, and I'm thinking about reviewing one more time before we go into how to move the pieces. Now the first piece that we're going to learn how to move is the pawn, okay? But we're going to review before we do that. Light color pieces line up on the H1 side, queen lines up on the D letter, okay? You have your rook, your knight, your bishops. Rook, knight, bishop. We know that the rook is worth 5, bishops and knights are worth 3, queen is worth 1, queen is worth 9, excuse me again, king is priceless, pawns are worth 1. Okay? Queen is 9, pawns are 1, queen is 9, pawns are 1, rooks are 5, knights are 3, bishops are 3. Okay? Now let's move forward. First piece we're going to learn how to move is the pawn. Now, the pawn moves 1 space at a time. It must move forward, but it captures diagonal. Look at the board with me. It must move forward, but it captures diagonal. Here's the example. We're going to move the E pawn. The E pawn is on E2. Okay? So we'll move the E pawn 1 space. It moves forward. Okay? Now the only time that it can move more than 1 space is the first time that I move either one of these pawns, I can move it 2 spaces. I can move it 2 spaces, okay? So if I want, I can move the E2 pawn to E4. E4. The first time that I move that pawn, okay? Or I can move it to E3 the first time that I move it. Now, notice, I only move forward, okay? Now, if I want to capture, then I capture diagonal. This pawn is on E3. I can capture on what? F4, or I can capture on what? D4, for example. Now, the E3 pawn can capture on D4, or I can capture on F4, or I can move to E4. Okay? So I can move past those 2 pawns if I want, only 1 space, or I can capture here, or I can capture here. Okay? Now, what you want to remember about the way the pawn's captured, because the movement of the pawn is very simple. You're moving forward 1 space at a time. But the way beginners get confused at a lot of times is that they think that they can capture a pawn exactly in front of one another. No, you can't. I call that a freeze. They cannot capture one another because the E3 pawn is on a dark color square. So it can only capture on a dark color square. It can't be on a dark color square and capture on a light color square. Okay? So remember, when the pawns are capturing, if your pawn is on a dark color square, which this pawn is on E3, it can capture on what? F4 or D4. So pawns will capture like this, again, or pawns will capture like this. Okay? Or, if you want, and I'm going to give you some advanced knowledge as we're teaching, if you want, you can just do what's called pass pawn. I'll pass it. If I pass those two pawns, then I'm only passing it to get better position where I can line up and try to use 2 or 3 other pieces to go with the pawn to attack the king. Okay? That is the movement of the pawn. And we'll review, but we're going to go to the next piece. Okay, the next piece that we're going to move is we learn how to move is the bishop. You have 2 bishops. Notice, one bishop is on a dark color, one bishop is on a light color. Light color bishop, dark color bishop. King bishop, queen bishop. Let's go over that again. Light color bishop, dark color bishop. This is the bishop next to the queen, so we label her the queen bishop. This is the bishop next to the king, so we label him the king bishop. Okay? Now notice, one is on light, one is on dark. So that gives you an indication of how that piece moves. Okay? Now if we were in person, I would ask you a question. What's the difference in these 2 pawns? But we're not, so I'm going to answer that. I mean, these 2 bishops. But we're not, so I'm going to answer that question for you. The difference is that one is on light, one is on dark. So that means that the king bishop moves diagonal only on the light color. All right? And the queen bishop, bishop next to the queen, moves diagonal only on the dark color. The light color bishop or the king bishop can never be on a dark color. It must always be on a light color. It must always be on a light color. Queen bishop must always be on a dark color. And it will capture on a dark color. Queen bishop captures diagonal. Dark color, going forward, going back, going forward, diagonal, coming back, diagonal, coming back, diagonal, or coming all the way back, diagonal. Notice, the queen bishop that's on the dark color squares always stay on the dark squares. The queen bishop that's on the dark square can never move on a light square. That's what you remember about that. And vice versa. The king bishop can only move on a light square. Only move on a light square. Only move on a light square. Only on a light square. Okay? So now we know how the pawn moves. We know how the bishop moves. Next we'll go to the rook. Unlike the bishop, the rook moves straight. Okay? It moves like a plus sign. It can move straight vertical or it can move straight horizontal. So right now these 2 rooks cannot move. So what I would do is I would push the H2 pawn, take advantage of the 2 squares. Now I can move the rook up. Straight, vertical, straight, horizontal, straight, vertical. And it can move on any color. The bishop is the only piece that is confined to a color. Okay? The rook can move on any color as long as it moves straight. Now, if we were in class and we were in person, I would ask you, what could the rook capture that's on E5 right now? It could capture the pawn on E7. Okay? Or it could capture the pawn on F7. Or it could come over and capture the pawn on G7, or it could go over and capture the pawn on D7. It's moving horizontal now. Now it's going to move vertical, straight again. Now it's going to move horizontal, straight again. Can the rook capture the pawn here on E4? No, because that's what? Horizontal. That's diagonal. So the only way that I can capture that pawn will be here. Now that's vertical. Okay? Here's horizontal. Okay? Vertical. Okay? So what you want to remember about the rook is that the rook moves straight, the bishops move diagonal. Rooks move how? Straight. Bishops move how? Diagonal. Okay? Queen, bishop moves diagonal on the dark color. King, bishop moves diagonal on the light color. Your rooks move straight. Okay? Like a plus sign. Okay? Plus signs are vertical and horizontal. Plus signs are vertical and horizontal. So here's your plus sign. So now you know how the rook moves. So remember that your bishops move diagonal like a multiplication sign. Bishops move how? They move diagonal like a multiplication sign. And then your rooks move like a plus sign or addition sign, or when you're adding, they move vertical or horizontal. Vertical or horizontal for your rook. Diagonal, multiplication sign for your bishops. Okay? So we're reviewing pawns move forward, bishops move diagonal. Bishops move diagonal. Okay? Right now, neither one of the bishops can move. If I want to move the king bishop on the light square, I have to move the two pawns, the G pawn or the E pawn. If I want to move the bishop, the queen bishop on the dark square, I move the D pawn or the B pawn, and it moves diagonal. Do we understand that? So bishops move diagonal, okay? Queen bishop, dark square. King bishop, light square. So here we are here, okay? That's how it moves. And remember, it moves like a what? A multiplication sign. Now we'll go to the rook. We know that the rook moves straight, vertical, or straight horizontal. Vertical, horizontal. Vertical, going backwards and forward, okay? Horizontal. Okay, it moves like a plus sign. Okay, bishops move like how? A multiplication sign. Rooks move how? Like a plus sign or an addition sign. Okay, or an adding sign. Okay, mathematical symbols are what we're referring to. Now, we went over the pawn, we went over the rook, we went over the bishop. Now, the next piece that we're going to talk about is the queen. The queen is the most powerful piece, okay? She has the most versatility. She has the most movement. She moves like the rook and the bishop. So I usually ask this question when we're in class. If she moves like the rook and the bishop, how does she move? I'll answer that question for you. If she moves like the rook and the bishop, that means that she can move straight or diagonal, okay? So if I push the D pawn to D4, how can the queen move? She can move straight. Okay? If I push the E pawn, how can the queen move now? She can move diagonal. If I push the C pawn, how can the queen move now? She can move diagonal. Okay? She moves straight or diagonal. And she is not confined to any color. She is the most powerful piece on the board. Okay? For you young ladies, you should be happy about that. She got the power. She's got the juice. Okay? So now where can the queen move? The queen can move to E2. The queen can move to F3. The queen can move to G4. The queen can move to H5. Okay? Let's say the queen comes out and moves to H5. Where can she move now? She can move to H6. She can move to H4. She can move to H3. She can move to G5. She can move to F5, E5, D5, C5, B5, A5. Okay? What you remember about the queen is that she moves straight or diagonal. Okay. Now, I've saved the knight for last because it's the most difficult piece to learn how to move, young people. So, in learning how to move the knight, we must incorporate the A in taps. And if we were in class, I would ask you what the A in TAPS stands for. Remember TAPS, T-A-P-S, time, attention, patience, and strategy. So the A in TAPS stands for time. So in learning how to move, the A in TAPS stands for attention. So in learning how to move the knight, you must pay attention. Okay, so here we go. First thing you want to remember about the knight is that if it starts out on a dark color, it will move to a light color. If it starts out on a light color, it will move to a dark color in this formation. Hippity, hippity, hop. Dark, light. And if there was a piece here on, F3, it could capture. Hippity, hippity, hop. Now it's on the light color square. So what color square is it going to move to now in the same formation? A dark color square in this motion. Hippity, hippity, hop. Or hippity, hippity, hop. Or hippity, hippity, hop. Or hippity, hippity, hop. Okay? So if the knight is on F3, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces that it can move to. Okay? And it's always going to move from dark to light or light to dark. Can it move back? Because you'll ask me, Coach Hudson, can the knight move back? Certainly it can move back. The thing that you want to remember about the knight as well is that it is the only piece that can jump over a piece. No other piece can jump over a piece but the knight. So let's go to the queen knight. Knight on the queen side. It's on the light color square. So now it will go hippity hippity hop. Or hippity hippity hop. Or hippity hippity or hippity hippity hop. Right here, if the pawn was not there. So if the pawn is lined up on, if the knight is lined up on B1, it can move to A3, which is 1 square, and it can move to C3, which is 2 squares. Okay, let's review from the very beginning. We know that our first rule is that when we set the pieces up and we have the light color pieces, then they line up on the H1 side of the board. There's H1. That's our first rule. Our second rule is that the queen lines up on the D letter, light color square, light color queen, D letter, dark color square, dark color queen, D letter. Okay? We know that. We know that this is a rook, a knight, a bishop, a king, a queen, bishop, knight, rook. Rook, knight, bishop, queen, king, bishop, knight, rook. Then we know that we have 8 pawns. 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, a king and a queen, 8 pawns. Okay? Now, we know that the pawn moves forward 1 space at a time. Except the first time that I move either one of my pawns, either 8 of the pawns, I can move it 2 spaces. After that, it can only move 1 space. We know that it moves forward, but it captures diagonal. If it's on a light square, diagonal on a light square. If it's on a dark square, diagonal on a dark square. Are we clear? Okay, now let's go to the bishop. We know that the bishops move how? They move diagonal. 1 bishop, which is a king bishop we're looking at now, moves diagonal on the light square. Diagonal, light square. Queen bishop is going to move diagonal on the dark square. Okay? Bishops move diagonal. Rooks move straight on any color square. They must move straight. Straight, vertical. Straight, horizontal. Straight, vertical. Straight, horizontal. Okay? Rooks move like what mathematical symbol? The plus sign. Bishops move like what mathematical symbol? The multiplication sign. Okay? We know that the queen moves like the what? The rook and the bishop. That means that she can move like a plus sign or a multiplication sign. That means that she can move straight or horizontal. So right now the queen can move straight. If she moves the D2, now she can move horizontal to the left or horizontal to the right, or she can move vertical back to the D1 square. Okay? Now, let's go over the knight. The knight moves in an L shape. It'll move from a dark square to a light square, or if it's on a light square, it can move to a dark square. So we go hippity hippity hop, light square, or hippity hippity hop, light square. That's your king knight. Or if we come over here with your queen knight, it's on a light square, hippity hippity hop, light. Hippity hippity hop, dark. I'm sorry, dark here, hippity hippity hop, dark here. Moving from a light color square. Now we went over all of the pieces except what piece have we not talked about? I'm glad you asked that question. Coach Hudson, I hear you asking me the question. When are we going to talk about the king? Let's talk about the king. The king is the most valuable piece on the board. It can never be captured. You must remember this now. It can never be captured. It can only be trapped. That's what's called check or checkmate. When the king is in check, it's trapped, but it can get out. When the king is in checkmate, it's trapped and it can't get out. So, the king moves somewhat like the pawn, but it has a little more versatility. I'm just going to put the king in the middle of the board. It can't move from here to here. I'm just going to place it here because it only moves 1 space at a time. So right now the king can move to F3. The king can move to E3. The king can move to D3. The king can move to D4. The king can move to D5. The king can move to E5. The king can move to what? F5. Or the king can move to F4. So we're going to take these pawns off the demo board. So if the king was on E4, and this pawn was here, it could capture. 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 The king can capture either one of those pawns or any other piece except a king. Kings can never capture kings. Okay? And kings can never be directly in front of one another or right next to each other. There always has to be a space in between. And the saying is that a king cannot check a king. Okay? There must be a space in between. So the king moves 1 space at a time in any direction on any color. I'm going to say it again. The king moves 1 space at a time in any direction on any color. Okay, we're going to put the pawns back. That concludes our fundamental teaching on how the pieces move, the value of the pieces, etc., etc.